So in this tutorial, I'm going to talk about adding text to our illustration here, okay? So at this point, you should have completed this, and you know, you should have everything outlined that you need to be outlined, everything shaded accordingly, okay? Anyway, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually delete this reference layer. We won't need this anymore, so let's just get rid of that. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag my template layer above everything, okay? And I'm going to double click this and turn it off. Turn off the template so it just is an image, okay? I'm going to select that image, use the selection tool here, and then I'm going to actually set this to multiply. This is a blending mode. By the way, I'm over the transparency palette. I talked about pulling that out before in our last tutorial and having it up underneath the color layer. If you don't have it that situated that way, that's okay. But anyway, we're going to go from normal to multiply. And what that does is that blending mode, anything that is dark will add to whatever value is below it, okay? So it makes it even darker. Anything that's white disappears. So I'm going to lower the opacity here so we can see through it a little bit better, which is kind of cool. And then we're going to lock it, and then I'm going to make a new layer to work with our text. But one of the reasons why I'm showing you this is because, you know, you're going to have to make your own movie poster here for our project. And the thing I want you to think about is, you know, well, when you're tracing out your image from your drawing, you don't have to bring it in as a template always like that. You could set it up like this, to where your template is above it, and therefore you can just turn it off and on as you need to, okay, and just build your shapes on layers underneath. Just make sure you lock this so that we don't accidentally click on it, okay? So anyway, what I'm going to do is let's get the type tool out, and then we're just going to click, and we're going to type in Thelma, and I'm going to hit the space, return, and I'm going to do Louise. L-U-S-E. Okay. Now, it's crucial when you are working on an image that you think about where the type is located. And so that's why I have this all set up in my drawing. Anytime you're going to be dealing with an image that has text, you need to think about leaving enough room so that the type does not compete with the image. And so in this situation, I just have a cloud, which is fine. Good designers know how to actually add text to an image. But when you're working as an illustrator, you need to think about in terms of like, well, where will the text go? Let's leave enough blank space there, okay? And so that's what I've done with this, and this is something you need to think about. Now let's continue on here. I'm actually going to just go up here to my control palette, or I could bring up my character palette. And to bring up your character palette, by the way, you can go up under Window, Type, and Character, okay? Because when we start adding text, start playing with the fonts, then it's going to be a little hard to see. So I'm just going to make this larger so we can see this. I did not put "and" in because it's a little difficult to work with. I've already created this before, and here it is. You can see it there. But I found that it was much easier to work with the text if I did "and" separately. Okay, so I'm just making this larger so we can see it. And the thing about working with type is we need to think about alignment, and we could align it center. Okay. But as you can see here, I kind of aligned it off that telephone pole. So that's why I have it left justified. And that's something else to think about in working with text is where are you aligning it to, okay? Typically you would do it centered, but in this situation, I like working off that telephone pole. Okay, so the next thing we're going to need to think about is what kind of font. And this is crucial, because this is the most crucial thing in working with text and image. And that is, one thing is the first thing that's most important is the text needs to be readable. It needs to be legible. So we need to pick a font that you can easily see. The next thing we need to think about is the font needs to be compatible with the artwork. We don't want it competing. We don't want it to clash. So we want something that actually complements this. And we're going to go over here and take a look at fonts. And mind you, the reason why I moved this over is because, see, that's by having that control palette there, it's just really hard to see. That's why I brought over my character palette, because this will make it much easier to work with. Now, I have a font in mind already, but you may not have that on your computer. Now, you need to think about what type of font you want to use. And, up under here, we can filter. There's a filter here. Once you click on this little arrow here, this pops up. So we can always filter out our fonts by classification. And we got, the first one is a sans serif. And a sans serif, there's two types of fonts mainly. There's this serif font, and those have the little feet, they call them, the little lines that stick out from the letters. And then the sans serif fonts. And the sans serif means basically it doesn't have those. And depending on the kind of image you want to use, we will, sometimes, put it this way, a sans serif font is much more modern looking, okay? Because in the history of fonts, fonts were first created when Gutenberg created the press. And, the main reason for the press, creating the printing press, was to replicate the Bible. And so, the Bible used to be handwritten by monks in monasteries. So the first types of fonts that were created were much more decorative to kind of resemble handwriting. And over time, they become much more simple. So a sans serif font came about in the 20th century, and they're much more modern looking. So you got to ask yourself, do we want this to look modern? Do we want it to look contemporary? Do we want it to look, more old-fashioned? So that's something to think about when you're dealing with picking out a font. Now let's go over here. I'm going to actually use a serif font. Okay, I think that's much more appropriate to this, and we can start to take a look. That's what I love about how this works. I'm just going to use my arrow key to kind of go through here. We can see which ones work, and a lot of them are not bad, except we probably would need something more of a bold, like if we were using this Baskerville. That's not a bad looking font. I'm going to turn off my template here so we can actually take a look at it. It's okay, but it does kind of scream. It doesn't, I want something that actually works with this more. And so let's go on down here. And like I said, I actually have a font in mind, but you may not have it. So you want to look for a font that will work with this without being, like this Cochin font's not bad. That's not a bad font. This one isn't either. I think that one works well. It depends on what fonts you have on your computer. The one I'm using is this Nuva Standard Bold, which I really kind of like, And so if you have that, then you can select that. Anyway, once you choose your font, your job isn't over. Even though you have it aligned and everything, there are things to start working with. And the three main things you want to work with is leading, okay? Leading is the space between the lines. And I'm just adjusting. This is leading over here, okay? A lot of times when it pops up, the leading is so tight that it's hard to see. So I'm actually going to decrease it just a little bit. We'll actually could bring up I know that we're trying to make it look like that, but, we can play around with the leading. Tracking. Tracking is the spacing between characters, okay? And we want to increase that so it stands out a little bit, okay? So that's kerning, and next is kerning, okay? But I'm not going to do that yet. Because one of the things, if you take a look at the template here, the T and the L are much larger, okay? And I'm actually just going to play around. We'll actually increase the size of our font just a little bit more. Yeah, we could probably increase it much more there to fit that. And then I'm going to actually go back to my leading and increase that down. I'm just playing around here. It's a, and then what I'm going to do is my tracking. I'm going to tighten it just a little bit for the moment. Okay. But anyway, so that's getting closer to what this looks like now. I'm going to use another tool which I just recently learned about, and that is the touch type tool. And this works with individual letters. So as you notice, the T and the L are much larger. And you can actually enlarge them with this touch type tool. Okay? You can do a lot of things with this touch type tool. You can rotate a letter, okay? And it works with one letter at a time. You can distort a letter, and you can that's increasing it vertically. And this down here increases the width, okay? Well, it's supposed to. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, this one increases the width. All right. So typically, graphic designers will tell you, oh, you shouldn't be playing with those things. You shouldn't distort your text. But, when it comes to titles, I'm going to just undo that. You take a look at titles and you see what they do with text. They play around with it. They sometimes they will distort text. Anyway, we can actually move this over to. That's the other great thing about this. We can actually move our text with this tool here. Okay. Anyway, let me let go of that, and our baseline. This tells us our baseline. Our baseline is here, and we can always reset it by going to 0, so it lines up with that. But anyway, I might want to actually increase the height on this just a little bit. Okay, which I think looks a little bit more like what I have written here. We're going to go down to the L and do the same thing. I'm going to increase the size a little bit. I don't know if I'm going to enlarge it any more than that. As long as we want to keep our baseline the same here. So I'll go back here because I accidentally moved it. All right, so now I've done that. So the next thing we need to do is I'm going to take this off. And I'm going to go and just get the type tool. Because what we want to talk about is doing kerning. Okay? Kerning is the individual space, is a space between two letters. Okay? And anytime you're dealing with text, depending on the font, it's always going to change. And of course, in this case here, it looks like the T and the H are a little too close because I enlarged that. It looks like the A and the M right here is too far away. So we'll start there. And what we're going to do is click in there, and I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key and click my arrows on my keyboard. I'm going to click the left arrow, and that will just bring that in just slightly, okay? And then let me play around with where the H is at. Let's see if we maybe increase that just a little bit. There we go. That looks much better, okay? I'm going to do this with the L and the O. And so every time, the thing is kerning has to be adjusted each time you change a font, because depending upon how the letters are, you need to look at how the spacing looks. And this doesn't look too bad. I could probably live with that. All right. And I'm just going to keep that there. Actually, I'm going to increase my leading because I'm going to now type in the word and. So I'm going to get my type tool again and type in just and. And we'll move this up, and let's decrease the size of it. I'll just do it here. You can do it over here too. Also can help to see this and where this is located here, because this kind of helps to align everything. Now, if I had not done this before, it might be a little bit more difficult. But let's take a look. I'm going to turn off my template again, and we'll zoom in just a little bit and take a peek at that. And it looks like maybe the D could come in a little closer on this. So I'm going to hit the Alt key and then I had to get the text tool, click in between N and D, and then I use my Alt key and my left arrow on my keyboard to adjust the kerning, okay? And we're pretty much done, Now, we're going to do something different here, too. So, here's the deal. When you're dealing with text and in an image, and if it's not if it's raster based, then you're not going to have to deal with worrying about fonts. But this is vector. So if you were to send a file with text in it, you would need to send the font too. Okay? But there is a way around that in Illustrator. And that is, we can actually turn the text to outline. And that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to select both of these, and then I'm going to go to type, and we're going to do create outlines. And voila, that turns it into shapes. So now, you know, if I was to send this file to somebody, I don't have to worry about them seeing what font I use, because all these are turned into text. Okay, we can still situate things. I see that maybe this E could be moved over a little bit more, and if that's the case, I'm going to use this group selection tool because they're all grouped right now, or I can ungroup them and maybe adjust that. So you can still adjust things just differently. You can't adjust the text per se, but you can play around with it. So let's say you are developing a logo and you're working with a font, but you want something to happen that is not happening in the font, meaning that you want to change it. Well, you can go in here and pick out individual anchor points here. Mind you, all my layers underneath are locked, so if they weren't locked and I just did that with the selection tool, it'd be a lot hard. Well, it'd be a lot harder, as you can see here. Do that and try that. Yeah, see, I would move the cloud. That's why I have all these layers locked right here. So anyway, let's say I wanted to move this and make the L like that, make it look like a 1. We can do that. That's one of the most cool. That's the coolest thing I love about being able to turn our text to outline, is that we can play around with it if we want to. So in creating your title, if you wanted to play around with something, that doesn't look good right there, but as you can see, I'm just playing around with maybe making this. Like, let's say we wanted to make that look like a faucet. Maybe we would draw a droplet shape right there. This just has so many possibilities, especially for graphic designers. Okay, so anyway, that's the main things you need to know about working with text in Illustrator. But like I said, one last thing here. We got the license plate, and I have a font on my computer that I've downloaded, and it's a license plate font. So if you want to find a license plate font, you can go on to the internet. This site, DaFont, is a great site for finding different types of fonts. And I'm just going to type in over here search, and we're looking for license and see what comes up. And there's the license plate font. Okay, and you can download this. Now it definitely will work on a Mac. It may work on a PC. I'm not certain on that. But anyway, you can download it, and it says here what it's based on. Also, it asks in the README that you should not share this font. You can use it for non-commercial purposes. And what I'm going to do is let's just download it, and we'll take a peek at this, okay? All right, there it is. I'm going to open it up here. We're going to double-click it, and there's a README file. That's why I'm not including this in our D2L. It says this font's for personal use only. Do not, under any circumstances, use the font in public media unless permission is given by the designer of the font, okay? And you may not share this font, neither on websites or on other computers, unless I have the permission. So I'm not asking this guy for permission. I'm just saying, if you want to go find this font, you can. Now, to install a font, if you're on a Mac, you just simply double-click it. And I think this is pretty much the same for a PC, too, because I've worked off of PCs. And, of course, this is already installed, all right? So you would hit the install button, and it would install it, all right? And that's how we can actually bring over fonts. Because a lot of times when you're looking for text, you're looking for fonts, you can't depend upon what the computer you're working on has. Sometimes you need to go and find some very specific looking fonts, and DaFont is a great site for that. Okay, so let's go back over here, and we'll type in. We're going to bring this up so we can see it, and we'll get to our type tool again, our character palette. That is our character. So anyway, this will align starting this way, left justified, and we'll just type in FRS 635, and let's go find that license plate font. We can also just type in LI. It's not finding it. Might be because, well, let's see. Let me go down here and see. Well, first of all, we're just going to turn off we're going to clear our filters, okay? And yeah, there it is. But let me see if I can find it this way again. There, it's popping up. So because I had the filter set to serif fonts, it would not find it. So we'll just use this right here, and then we'll shrink this down. So we'll bring this over here. Let me zoom in here, and maybe bring it down. Yeah, okay, that looks good. Now again, when you're dealing with type, you should always look at the tracking and the kerning. So I don't mind the tracking on this right now, but it just looks like that if you compare all the letters here, where the F to the R to the S, they look pretty well spaced. But when I'm looking over here at the 6 and this 3 versus the 3 and the 5, it looks like there's a little extra space in between the 6 and the 3. So I'm going to bring that in a little bit there. Okay, and that looks much better. And then, we would just keep this in here, and then we would turn this, and we're going to go to type and create outlines. And then we're done, okay? So this should show you everything you need to know about text for our exercise and for our project. And I'm going to do one more video tutorial dealing with color and enlarging, okay?